Right now, we're 1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of students, primarily first-year university or college students and grade 12 high school students are asking is virtual school really that difficult, or is it me? And in the context of those first-year students in university or colleges, they're also asking themselves, is university and college that difficult? Because they're really struggling, and they're wondering if it's, the matter of because they're doing things online, or if it's just the realities of universities and colleges. So there's no doubt that teaching online right now has its difficulties. As a professor, compared to at the graduate level, compared to my other previous students in previous years, I definitely see the current cohort of students, struggling much more. I'm teaching the same content. These students are of the same caliber as previous years. It's a very competitive program. I know they're good students. I know they're, very capable of achieving, high success, based on, reviewing these applications during the admission cycle. But these students, especially this current cohort, is really struggling. And it's because they don't, compared to the in-person classroom experience, where, of course, in a lecture discussion based course, we still do discussions to an extent on Zoom, but it's harder on Zoom because a lot of students don't turn on their cameras, which I don't really care, but it is harder to read the room as a professor. So when it was in person, I can see people's facial expressions. I can see whether or not people were confused. I can see if students were typing. It was a way for, profs to kind of check in on students without the students actually having to raise their hand or telling me that they're struggling. These being in in-person classrooms, and a lot of other colleagues I've spoken to also agree, is that it's much harder to read the room, especially when students are haven't put on their cameras. But even for the students that do put on their cameras, it's still hard to read the room because all I see is their face. I don't see whether or not you're typing. I don't see what you're looking at. It's just a lot harder to read the room, and which, again, it also is harder for me to kind of tailor my lecture to the students of that for that particular class, because if I don't know whether or not you're absorbing the content, I wouldn't know to go back and to regurgitate, a slide, or to, further explain the concept, whatever it may be. Another struggle with Zoom classrooms for me is that when it was in person, and again, based on, this is for my course, which is discussion based, is that there are a lot of discussions that happens in small groups, and when it was in person, it was a lot easier to kind of determine if students needed longer time, or if they were struggling with the concept or the discussion topic, and it would allow me to kind of move from group to group, and even for students to come up to me and ask questions. Whereas in a Zoom breakout room, for example, students are really confined to their own rooms. I do my best to try to hop around the classrooms, but it is quite difficult because I could get stuck in a breakout room, and once I've allocated 20 minutes, for example, I don't know what other students are doing in the other classroom, so oftentimes I just end the breakout room, and some students might not be finished with their discussions. Some students might have been struggling in their breakout room waiting for me to hop in, but I was stuck in a breakout room, with other students asking me a lot of different questions. So again, the reality of being in a virtual classroom is much more difficult. We try our best, but I think on both sides we are struggling to an extent, and this really kind of boils down to the inability to read the room and see what's happening. Because I think a lot of professors really relied on having that in-person classroom to really gauge whether or not their students were understanding concepts, or if they knew the concept already, they can just skip it. But right now, we can't really gauge that anymore. So we, allocate to each concept the same amount of time. And of course, the reality is some students may already know some concepts, and they're hoping to kind of dive in a particular concept that they may not be familiar with. But with the ways we're doing things right now, it's just a lot more difficult. And a second thing with having to do online school is a student life experience. A lot of universities and college students really look forward to going to university and college for that student life experience. Not so much the lecture or coursework, of course, but it's really about, being in a confined campus with people of your age, going for the same sector or field that you're interested in. There are a lot of things, a lot of that community feeling that comes in. And when you're part of a community where a lot more of other students who are in the same boat, self-formed community practices, get formed. There are study groups, there are clubs, there are interest groups, etc., etc. It's a lot easier for students when they're in person to kind of tap a friend and ask for help. But in particular for online school, and especially for the current first years, is that they don't really know who's in their program. They don't really know who to reach out to aside from their profs and TAs and instructors, and maybe sprinkling of friends that they knew, from high school prior, or from their community. So it's a lot more difficult to meet with people, and as a result, you don't really get that student life experience, and you don't really get that community feeling that other upper years would have currently, because they've already met and know who's in their program, for example. So in particular, the student life experience has been really impacting students, and especially for first year students right now who don't know really a lot of their peers. And the last thing is, which really applies to both types of students, grade 12s and the first years, is that online school is a lot more difficult, because it puts the onus on the student to reach out to their profs, their instructors, their teachers, their TAs to ask for help if they need help. And it also puts a lot of onus on the student to prepare well in advance of class. A lot of professors right now, and I assume for teachers too, is they expect students to have read the content before coming to class where you would discuss. And this is quite a shift from the in-person model, because in the in-person model, we kind of assume, for students to just learn the content during class. But whereas in Zoom, or in the online classroom, we are attempting to make the class more engaging, and by doing so, we're putting a lot more of breakout groups and discussion items in the lecture instead, which then means if the student has not prepared before class, this would impact their ability to even participate in the discussion. So they might just spend their 2-3 hours lecture just listening to other people talk, but they might not be actually understanding the full discussion, which again is time wasted on the student's end. But an unintended consequence of putting in a lot more breakout groups and discussions is the lecture time, the traditional lecture that the teacher or professor might have done is now a recording on your school's platform, which again you're also expecting students to do on the side. So really is adding more lecture hours than before. So in reality, students are spending more time per course than compared to in person, which then takes up their ability to work on other things, whether it be other part-time jobs or experiences, extracurriculars, or even times on assignments and just studying in general. So this unintended consequence then forces students to be even a better time manager, to really organize their time, which a lot of university students and high school students struggle with, because in that transition period, you're really still trying to get a sense of what your studying style is, of what your working style is. So it's already a difficulty during the in-person era for students, and this issue is just further compounded and exacerbated when we move into an online school environment. And then the last thing, as an unintended consequence of having a lot more breakout discussions and moving lectures as videos for students to watch outside of class time, is that because students are so isolated at home right now, and definitely for the first year students and and also high school students, when you get into those senior years of high school, grade 11 and 12, and then also in your first 2 years of university, first and second year students, these years are crucial for setting up your foundation of knowledge. So in high school, grade 11 and 12, the courses are really, set up to create a foundation base so you can go into your universities and colleges with a base knowledge, which is important to actually understand, whatever it may be you're studying. So for example, grade 11 and 12 chemistry is important for you to know in order to actually understand, first and second year chem if you're a science student. And likewise, in university and college, your first 2 years are also the foundational years to set you up for success in third and fourth year. And moving these, crucial years online really impacts a student's ability to absorb the content properly, to actually understand the knowledge properly. Because again, there are, difficulties of the online classroom, like I said before. But also because students are so isolated at home, they can easily just skip classes, or they can easily, go down a rut of not actually understanding the concepts, and they might be just, Googling as much as possible, but they don't even know where to start, and they don't even know, where the confusion starts. So it's a lot harder for these students to even actually understand the concept, and if they don't understand these concepts properly in these foundational years, in the years to come, they're going to struggle even more. So if you're a grade 12 student right now, or a grade 11 student, or a first and second year university student, and you're thinking, school is really hard right now. Is it me, or is it online school? Or is it because I just recently came into university and college and people say it's just harder and, expect our grades to drop 10-20%? I would say is partly because of the online school environment, and partly because of those foundational years. Of course, the course content is harder than before. But a lot of these issues is attributed due to your transitional years, but also further exacerbated because you're currently in an online school environment.